Thanks, Stefano. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Clotilde Cucinotta. I met Clotilde many years ago when I was in London, commuting between San Sebastian and London. Clotilde got his master's degrees in condensed matter physics from the University of Messina in the beautiful island of Sicily. Then she moved to Reggio Emilia, in the more or less in the middle of Italy, to work with Professor Elisa Munirai on surface functionalization of with organic molecules. Then she moved to the ETH Zurich to work with Michele Parnello on materials for energy and hydrogen storage. Then she moved to work with Stefano Sanvito at the Trinity College London as a postdoc. She then moved to work on electron transport, and she did also some calculation based on near-DFT for OJ spectra and some independent work on 2D materials. Then she collected essentially all this expertise for a very prestigious APSRC fellowship, on early career fellowship, to move to the Imperial College London since 2018. And I believe this is more or less the topic for the today talk. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Roberto, for the kind invitation and introduction. I'm very glad to present my work here in this lovely environment. Okay, so the title of my talk is Enabling the First Principle Modeling of Electrochemical Nanointerfaces under Applied Voltage. So, in electrochemical devices such as electrolyzers or sensors and also some kind of memories, the processes that determine efficiency and durability of the devices occur in the first few atomic layers at the interface between the electrode and the electrolyte under the effect of an applied bias, so a field. So if essentially we want to optimize this kind of devices to enable a more sustainable future, for instance, we need to understand what is the effect of this potential on the reactions that occur at the interface. However, understanding what happens at the interface is difficult, both experimentally and computationally. And I will try to show possible solution to this problem. And I've worked in the last few years essentially in enabling new solutions to overcome this bottleneck. But why, are electrochemical interfaces so relevant? Electrochemical interfaces are crucial not only for energy, storage, conversion, and production, but they are essential for many kinds of sensing, for some electrochemical memories, but also it's at the interface between different materials that corrosion and degradation processes occur. And electrochemical interfaces are also very important for biology. If we have an implant, we don't want it to corrode, or even neurotransmission. If we want to think, we need the electrochemical interface. Every year, trillions of dollars are indeed invested in trying to optimize all these devices and processes. And yet, even despite this huge importance of these interfaces, still our understanding of what happens in those crucial few layers is very limited. And as I said, experimentally, this is difficult because these are varied interfaces, so where the active sites are live under a condensed phase, under a liquid phase. And also theoretically, this presents its challenges. And why is that? why in 2025 we are still not able to model these systems, or we have challenges. It's because of the complexity of the system. So electrochemical interfaces are complex. There are multiple degrees of freedom and phases, atoms. We have different phases, we have dipoles, we have charges, we have long-range interaction. But perhaps the most important feature of an electrochemical interface is the huge, highly nonlinear, non-uniform electric field that exists at the interface. These fields are huge, of the order of 10 to 10 volt per meter. And if you want to have an example of how big is that, you can imagine that to initiate lightning, you need 10 to 6 volt per meter. So that is much more than what is needed to initiate lightning. And these are a unique defining feature of electrochemical interfaces that drives the electrochemical transformation. But this is also very difficult to model. And so in the rest of the talk, I will show how I have overcome this bottleneck. And just to say that what is the status of the art is that many people in the community thought that they could model this complexity just addressing one single aspect of electrochemical transformation. And so we have many models which use neutral cells where the electrons cannot get in and out of the cell. This is the standard of 99% of calculations in electrochemistry and in a theoretical community. Sometimes calculations are done not including electronic structure, or using dry interfacial models, so models of metals in contact with vacuum, to model the effect of what happens in that complex environment that I just described. The result of this is that we have often very wrong molecular coverages, interfacial structure. We miss sometimes, or most of the times, a correct description of the interfacial polarization and activation barrier, the kinetics, which is so important to define the operation of these devices and in general processes, is completely missed. To give you an example, just focus on the hydrogen evolution barrier, the basic hydrogen evolution barrier at the platinum-water interface. Now, experimentally, this is 0.2 electron volt. Computationally, the best we can do is to get 0.85 electron volt. And I mean, 0.6 electron volt of difference is a huge difference, because since current and barrier are related by a Butler-Volmer equation, so it's an exponential relation, this means that there are huge differences in predicted current densities. So how to address this? What I've done is to combine my competencies in chemistry and physics to try to model in a unique environment all the electrical and chemical aspects of the electrochemical transformation. And so in particular, I've developed what I call this DFT in operando computational microscope that allows to have really a direct view of what happens at the electrified interface under applied voltage. In particular, in my approach, I use, they are fully dynamics. They are informed of the electronic structure. There is an atomistic representation of the electrolyte, which includes also the electronic structure. And most important, I have a constant voltage maintained during the simulation. So we can account for really the effect of this field. So all with these novel computational tools that I've developed in the last few years that are now available for the community, I have started playing and addressed various problems and advanced the molecular understanding of various problems in electrocatalysis, corrosion, and sensing. But here in this talk, I will focus mostly on case studies that are related to electrocatalysis. Okay, but how I did that? How I did fix this potential? To fix the potential, I have developed a hierarchy of methodologies and that allow to address the problem. The simplest of which is what I call the ion imbalance methodology, which I would like to illustrate now. And with this methodology, which still operates in the old setting of neutral cells, essentially what I do is to simulate the effect of the potential by charging the electrode. So in practice, an imbalance of anions and cations are thrown in the electrolyte. And pretty much as in experiments, it is done when you want, for instance, to reduce a nanotube. You throw ions in solution and the nanotube reduces. So I copied that from the experiment and implemented in a simulation. So if you include a different imbalance, a different excess of anions or cations in solution and allow the electrode to respond to that ion in solution, you obtain a configuration of the electrode which is a different state of charges. So different imbalances correspond to different charges and therefore to different potential drops with respect to a reference, so different electrode potentials. And so with this, it is possible, one potential at a time, to have a direct view of what happens at the interface at fixed potential condition. With this methodology, it is possible, for instance, to observe metastable states and the nature of metastable states and compare the energetics of these stable states, taking care that that potential doesn't change during the simulation, which is not always straightforward. And with this, one can obtain the structures and, of course, also polarization of the interface in real time. And so what I've done is to apply my methodology to, sorry, I need to have some towel because I have, okay, I don't find. Okay, sorry. And okay, so I will, so what I've done with this, I have, yeah, I've thought, don't worry. I want to present the first case studies where I've applied this and to show what I've learned, what we have been able to learn applying this new approach. And I started from the most fundamental, thank you, and the most fundamental interface for electrocatalysis, which is platinum water. This is a very important technological interface. It's very relevant, for instance, for hydrogen evolution catalysis in electrocatalysis in electrolyzers. And I mean, the market of global hydrogen market is huge and is predicted to further increase in the following years, Trump allowing. And only the market of the electrolyzers is, I mean, more than it's very important with more than 80 million tons of hydrogen per year produced in this way. And the loading of platinum drives essentially the cost. So even a little improvement in how we use platinum for these electrolyzers can produce huge computation cost savings, okay? But to improve how the electrolyte works, we need to know first how the surface is covered by hydrogen, and then how the mechanism for hydrogen production in this electric field under applied potential, because the reaction is driven by potential. And so what, but still we are not there yet. And so what do we know from experiments, for instance? Okay, from experiments, we know that when the potential goes down from the potential of zero charge towards the potential where hydrogen starts evolving, experimentally it is known that there are two species of hydrogen which start absorbing over the surface. First, there is, here there is no hydrogen. Then this under potential deposited hydrogen start absorbing, which is a species of hydrogen which is supposed to be absorbing on FCC sites. And then after the hydrogen start evolving, there is a second species that start absorbing, which is the over-potential deposited hydrogen, which absorbs on top sites and lead to the production of hydrogen. However, we do not know if these species coexist over the surface. What is the structure, the lateral structure that they form over the surface? What is the interplay of these hydrogen species? And the connected problem is the interpretation, the molecular origin of this observed peak in differential capacitance that is observed around the potential of zero charge. So essentially, there is this peak, which is experimentally observed, which cannot be predicted at all only with the traditional theories of the double layer continuous models. And that is only anticipated qualitatively to depend on the electronic features of the interface by simplified models. And but again, how voltage controls absorption, how this is related to capacitance of the interface is still unknown. And it's precisely these questions that we are able to answer with this methodology. So first of all, we are able to reproduce the experimental datum that the coverage hydrogen coverage increases when you go down with the potential. And you can see this just looking at the color of the coverage bar, which describes the coverage bar. And we are also able to reproduce, for instance, the absorption-desorption currents experimentally, which matches very nicely with the experiment. But we can do much more than this, and we can anticipate surprising feature of the apparently innocent platinum, ideally flat platinum-water interface. So first of all, we can offer the first direct observation of the dynamical interplays of the two species of hydrogen, the species that absorbs a higher potential, the UPD, here in blue, which absorb on FCC site, and the OPD species, which absorbs on top site. And we can see the interplay. And surprisingly, we see that even in this flat interface, we have a lateral nanostructuring with hydrogen counterintuitively clustering together and forming dynamical clusters that evolve in time and interchange to each other while they, at the same time, coexist over the surface. So the hydrogen evolution reaction must involve the two species because they coexist, even if there is a majority in potential that are consistent with the hydrogen evolution of OPD. And the surprises are not found here, because we can also draw a relation between the wettability properties and the absorption properties of hydrogen over the surface and the potential. So we can see that at potentials, when the hydrogen is present over the surface, water is repelled and points the hydrogen towards the surface, which is a typical hydrophobic setting. But when water can absorb over the surface in a water-rich region at higher potential, we can see that the surface is strongly hydrophilic. And the way this happens, it's to some extent a rewrite the book of electrochemistry, showing that water, to some extent, if there are chemists here, perhaps they will be a bit disturbed with what I'm going to say, that water behaves like an ion. So, in fact, around the potential of zero charge, water can charge. Every water molecule is charged about 0.1, sorry, there is a typo here, 0.1 electrons per water molecule, and chemisorb strongly, forms a strong chemisorption dipole, which is even stronger than the reorientation dipole of water. And importantly, when the potential goes up, the configuration of water stays the same, this flat chemisorption dipole, but the number of dipoles increases. So the polarization mechanism changes completely with potential. And this allows also to interpret the origin of the peak in differential capacitance. Because if we plot here in this teal curve, the charge, no? the charge, yeah, the sharper increase in the charge, which correspond to this sharper increase in chemisorption dipoles. If you do the derivative of this, you obtain a bell-shaped capacitance, which matches almost one-to-one the experimental datum. So we see that the onset of this peak in capacitance has to be associated to this change of the surface from hydrophilic to hydrophobic, and to this change in the polarization mechanism induced by potential. So I think that so these are huge implications in the understanding of the surface, and was totally unexpected with previous methods. With this method, we can also observe. Okay, that is not me, I don't know, it's a ghost. And yes, okay, so we can see lateral distribution. We can predict, for instance, vibrational SFG spectra for platinum in this case. When we say that the change of the signal intensities at vibrational frequency can correlate directly with the change of water structure of the interface. And this is not an experiment that can be still done, because there is strong resonances that make this experiment very difficult on surfaces, but on platinum metal surfaces. But I mean, we can anticipate that. Okay, so we see that we can learn a lot. But of course, this is a very flat, ideal surface. And there is, I mean, a long way to simulate what happens in a real reactor. Where surface, I mean, typically in devices, the platinum electrode exists as multi-particulate. So, I mean, I have an aspiration to try to complicate my models even more, and to try to get to some realistic view of what happens, a bit more realistic view of what happens in a real device. And in this, so this is something that I'm still working on. This is a model for the interface that represents one-to-one what is observed experimentally. If you if you apply, if you perform a cyclovoltammetry over a platinum water interface, you see that at some point the metastable state, the first metastable state that the system reaches is the one with this one where there are these islands separated by wells over the surface. And interestingly, the separation of each island of is about 1 nanometer, and we can simulate. This is a model for my system which is done completely, I mean, ab initio from first principle, and the separation of the islands is exactly the same as what observed in the experiment. But this interface has also edges, so one can understand what is the role of low coordination sites. And the terrace, this is a periodic system, is large enough to represent the bulk behavior of a terrace. Okay, as we have assessed this, and we see that doing this already even new information comes, where essentially we see that the potential concentrates at the edges and makes these edges positive, and we have a full coverage of water which is present over the edge already at potentials which would be compatible with the full hydrogen coverage on the flat surface. Thank you. And so we see that while the edge is it's not me, I mean, I don't know who is that who's doing that. Okay, this is me. Okay. And so we see that edges behave differently than than the basal plane. It's covered by water and is more positive at potentials where we would expect only hydrogen in a flat surface. And this can affect strongly the hydrogen evolution reaction mechanism, but does not affect the capacitance, because since the capacitance, again, is driven by that increased the chemisorption dipole, which is formed over the surface because charged water chemisorbs over the surface. Here the edge is already at saturation, so there is no contribution of the edge to the capacitance of the interface. So it's very interesting, at least in these potentials. Okay, so another very quick example of the importance of how changes in voltage dramatically alter the fundamental aluminum oxide, the fundamental mechanisms on surfaces is about aluminum water interfaces. So we studied essentially the mechanism for oxide growth, and we saw that at different potentials, there are different mechanisms of oxidation of an aluminum surface. So we see that at low potentials, we observe the growth of low potential, we do not have any coverage, but at potentials which are below, around the open circuit potential, we see the growth of an ordered phase. And at potential which are higher, we see that the predominant phase is the growth of an amorphous oxide growth. It's the growth of an amorphous phase. And this calculation resonate with some experiments that have been done of this surface only at the open circuit potential. So we see that the potential, the changes in voltage dramatically alter the fundamental aluminum oxidation mechanism. Okay, all of this, we have seen that we can have this direct view of what happens at the electrified interface under bias. And we can have a picture of the physical chemical properties and corrosion mechanisms over the surface. But what I've said until now is in the standard framework, where the number of electrons in the cell cannot change. But actually, that is not enough in the system, because if you do this, if you don't allow the number of electrons in the cell to change, essentially you are not able to account for the external circuit that it's always present in every calculation under applied bias. And just to give an example, when you want to model whatever charge transfer process, which can be a simple hydrogen absorption process, and you want to study the kinetics of this process, which seems a pretty basic thing to do. But actually, during the dynamics, since there is the flux of the electrons that sustain the electron transfer is not present, during this simulation of this reaction, the electrode potential changes. Okay, so essentially it goes down during the simulation, and it brings down all the pathway from hydrogen in solution to hydrogen, let's say, over the surface, or from hydrogen over the surface to hydrogen released in solution. And so it's impossible to understand what is the activation barrier for this process if the process is under potential control, occur at the fixed potential conditions. So don't trust if you see any calculations around about kinetics, because it's a problem which has not been solved, or it has been solved in a very, very cumbersome way, which requires a lot of calculations and is not a direct view. So to address this problem, actually, what you need is to have an open boundary description of the electrons. You need 2 electrons to go in and out of the cell so that you can simulate the real experimental environment. And this is precisely what the next level of my methodology implementation has done. So with this hairy probes, DFT, hairy probes is because there are very tiny probes that are attached to that you can attach to part of your systems, so the atomic orbitals in particular of your system. You can attach them, and each probe can be characterized by a certain electrochemical potential. So if you attach to this side the probes with electrochemical potential, and here with certain potential drop with respect to the other set, you essentially open the boundaries of the system for the electron, and so you essentially are able to control the local Fermi level of the electrons, and therefore to describe what happens in the real system when it's attached to a battery. And this in the limit where you only account for atomic current or ionic current, but not for electric current through the electrolytic cell, which is what happens in an electrochemical system normally. There is a very, very good thing that you can express this formalism and the effect of these probes, which is robustly derived by the Liebman-Schwinger scattering theory. You can this all translate in practice in a different recipe for the occupation of the orbitals. So you obtain the orbitals as a combination, the occupation as a combination of Fermi functions, which uses quantities. Why I'm boring you with all these technical details? It's just because the quantities that you need to calculate this new occupation are present in the code during the dynamics. So the effect is that you can do molecular dynamics under bias at the same cost of DFT. So normally, when you apply these methodologies for molecular electronics, where you try to see what is the effect of the applied potential to a system, the cost, the computational cost, is typically 1 order of magnitude more than DFT if you are under bias. But here is exactly the same computational cost. So we have enabled something which is very powerful. So we can see what happens in the system directly under potential at the same cost of DFT. I think it's very nice. And of course, we have tested this methodology, and we see that we can reproduce, for instance, the basic charging of water, even with very simplified models for the surface. And we can see that the orientation of water changes very little, and so it's always more or less in this chemisorption flat position. That there is a reorganization of charge around the positive centers that explains why we cannot overcome a certain coverage of water, because, I mean, when you charge the surface, the substrate, reorganize the charges around the positive center represented by the water plus the platinum to which it is attached. And this reaches a saturation at some point. So you cannot go over a certain coverage just because, and we observe that directly with these very simple calculations. And also we observe something that has some consequences for people who simulate these kind of systems with more standard approaches. So we observe that when you simulate systems of low potential, there is a reorganization, and there is water, let's say, fly away during the dynamics, during the simulation. This is also simple calculations. And so we see that there is an increase of coverage of water molecules with potential. And so why we say that, why I'm so sort of surprised of this, is because you have to consider that the standard electrochemical community developed models for neutral interfaces. And then they use that to predict what happens in systems where there is a potential. And the effect of the potential is to add a thermodynamic correction electron transfer reaction, which include contemporary proton and electron transfer, okay? A concerted proton electron transfer. Otherwise, they think that everything is the same as the neutral system, and you can just correct the energy a little bit in that way, only for that specific kind of systems. But here we prove directly that that is not the case, that the potential induces a change of structure, and also that even if you model a simple absorption process for water, the structure of the water layer and the energy of the water layer is affected. Okay, so we cannot really use those approaches, and we need an explicit voltage control if we want to have a reliable description of the interface. And the last, okay, I want also to say that what we are really interested in when we simulate an interface is to account for the potential drop with respect to a certain reference. So, okay, this bit of the work has been done, that we can control this level, okay, the level of the electrode, and fix that in the proper way. But of course, there is also another problem. I mean, are we really able to reproduce the potential drop with respect to a certain reference so that we can align our electrode potential to some experimental scale? And so we can compare really what happens in the real experiment. And actually, we have been also able to do this. So we see that this method can reproduce the potential drop with respect to a reference independently on how technically we decide to apply the potential. So this is something that it is important. So whatever you apply the potential in the electrode, you reproduce the same potential profile, which is also something very good. And so this has huge implication in the ability to simulate the kinetics of processes that occur in devices like electrolyzers, and to fix that problem of the fact that we are not able to simulate directly the activation barrier at interfaces which are electrified. And don't think only to the simple device, but things even a corrosion process occur. I mean, if you want to know what happens at that in stationary conditions, I mean, or how a potential affects that, or even if you want to study simple absorption over the surface at open circuit potential, you need to take care that that potential of the electrode doesn't change without you wanting it during the simulation. So I think that is really not only regarding the specific simulation of devices, but also other simple simulation that you want to occur at a fixed potential conditions that requires a feeding of electrons from the environment that you perhaps don't have in simulations that have a fixed number of electrons. And so with this Harry probe methodology, we can fix this level. We fix also the reference, which is sufficiently stable, and so we can enable the activation of the description of charge transfer mechanism without assumptions. The last bit that I want to quickly illustrate is the next level of simulation of the effect of the potential, and this time also the current at an electrified interface. Because I want to say that, okay, in the standard ideally described electrified interface, we do not have at all electric current going through the system. But we know that there are very, very interesting electrochemical processes that occur in electrochemical environment that actually imply that there is some electron current going through the system. For instance, if we think in electrochemical metallization memories, where you generate two states, okay, two resistance state for the system, depending on the potential that you applied at the boundary of your two electrodes. And that can be explained microscopically with the formation or dissolution of the wire consistently with the potential that you apply or remove. So in this case, the wire, in this case, you want to know what are the conditions for this wire to grow and you want to know what is the effect of the current in making this atomic transfer occur. Imagine another similar example, a dendritic process at an interface. If you have a current flowing through the dendrite, perhaps the transfer of momentum from electron to ions help ions moving when the current go in one direction and prevent it when the current go in the other direction. This is the so-called wind force. It's you imagine if you have some pebbles in a river, I mean, it costs much more for you to bring the pebble across against the current than doing it with the current. So with this methodology, we are able to simulate also these kind of processes for the first time. And so this has been implemented. We have a first demonstration that there is a charge reorganization, which is dynamics during the dynamics. Of course, in this case, the computational cost is much higher because this follows an interfacing of a standard molecular electronic code based on an equilibrium green function with the DFT way of calculating forces, essentially. But still, a system like this can be simulated. And for instance, we can predict that if we have a wire in solution, or we have a wire which is in gas phase, the transmission profile is different. And so if you apply a bias, the response is different. We have different channels that are produced, and that can determine, for instance, the electrochemical, the response, but in general, the behavior, conductive behavior of that specific system. So the electrochemical environment, it's also important to be able to account for the electrochemical environment in this kind of processes. And that's it. So in summary, I've demonstrated how an enhanced view of the electrochemical interfaces during operation can be achieved. And that, we have been able, first of all, to identify the two species of hydrogen, which are being predicted, but never proved from experiment. We have found that there is an holistic connection between variation of hydrogen coverage, interface wettability, and the capacitive response of the interface across reducing potentials, of course. And we have seen that the electrode polarization around the potential of zero charge is primarily associated with the change of coverage of charged water and chemisorption water molecules. And that the onset of the peak in differential capacitance is due to the electronic response of interfacial water to the increase of the potential, essentially. I've shown you also that I've developed a hierarchy of methods to model the effect of the applied potential, and that these methodologies essentially expanded the scope of non-equilibrium molecular dynamics to molecular dynamics under bias, non-equilibrium molecular dynamics under bias, and that potentially induced surface polarization impacts significantly coverage absorption energy, even for simple absorption processes like the absorption of a water molecule. All of this has been possible only thanks to the hard work of the people that I work with that enable all of this. Essentially, here I've showed just a subset of the work that I've done, but I've also different interests in CO2 reduction, batteries, sensing, and also interfacial growth processes on 2D materials. And this is my group at its peak, essentially. At Imperial, now it's a bit smaller, it's 4 people. And thank you for your attention.
So, questions? Doubts? Please.
Okay, could you show the slide 2-3 before when you? Okay.
Yeah.
With there. Oh.
This is aluminum.
With the models of electric field.
Okay. Yes, I have. Yes, I have drawn the electric field here.
More. Before the end here.
Before the end. Okay.
When you all these three approximations you discuss.
Yeah, I see.
Because you have this unit cell there.
This one.
Yeah, this one.
Mhm.
Okay. Then about the hair probe, this figure.
Mhm.
Because I see that you have charge and then electric field in the middle between electrodes. But you see that on the left and the right side, you have some different potential outside of the unit cell. But then my question is, do you use a periodic boundary condition or not?
Not in that direction.
Then how you calculate?
I mean, you don't need, this is not, I mean, you solve the Poisson equation not in periodic boundary conditions.
But then how do you do DFT calculations in this case, band structure?
I mean, you don't, you have a lateral periodicity.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Okay. But you have a full electronic description. You don't need to have periodic boundary conditions in all directions. There are methods that allow us to solve the Poisson equation without periodic boundary conditions. Yes, and so you solve the DFT problem, but no, we do not apply periodic boundary conditions in the yeah. And actually, we have proven also that if you apply periodic boundary conditions but include a little bit of vacuum here, the result is very similar. But anyway, in this case, there are no periodic boundary conditions. So the cell continues a little bit here, there is vacuum, and this potential is like this, and the metal it is present up to inside the cell. This is the simulation cell. And so, but this layer is sufficient enough to screen.
No, because the atomic screening, just the accumulation charge is just slightly above the first atomic layer, right?
Yes.
Just with the second level, more or less the same.
Yeah.
It's uncharged situation. In this case, but then could you explain again why in the left and the right side they are different now, accumulation? How
why the accommodation is different?
Because here it is positive, they are negative, or
yes. I mean, there is a potential drop. There is a potential drop between these two electrodes. It's just because you have this sort of hairy propagators that send the electrons to a reservoir characterized by a specific electrochemical potential. So if you impose that the delta mi with respect to the average Fermi level of the system is what you decide, then you can impose a potential drop across the system. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, if you do the first exercise that we did is to model a simple capacitor with two plates in gas phase. And so if we could reproduce capacitance, and you can. So you can model the potential drop between two electrodes. The method is able to reproduce this. And yeah, and that's it. And
one question more.
Yeah, please.
Then you're talking about this occupation number, or depending on the temperature.
Yeah, that is electronic temperature.
But then electronic temperature, it means electronic temperature of the electrodes, because I think water has has gap, no yeah. Fermi level in water.
I mean, water has a gap, and of course that is more a problem of the functional that you use to simulate the system. And it's important that you have a good description, you have a potential which is able to describe properly the relative energy level alignment in the system. So if the overall Fermi level of the system in a system unbiased is localized over platinum. An important thing when you describe a water-platinum interface is to have a water gap which is around the Fermi level of the platinum, so that there is no electron transfer towards yes. So
if you do everything so consistently, why you
But because DFT is approximated, the exchange and correlation component of the DFT is approximated. And so depending on that approximation that you use, you can have a better or worse description of the water gap. Okay.
Suppose you have the best possible.
Okay.
And then now it seems that the temperature dependent here only for electrons in electrodes, but the water every time electronic system is at zero, no temperature. Looks like.
No, because this is done at, this is done at not at zero temperature, but let's say 300 Kelvin, because this is molecular dynamics. The atoms are moved with an average kinetic energy, which is consistent with that. And the electronic temperature of all atoms is 300 Kelvin as well. Yes? It can be slightly different, but it's, yeah. And the entropic contribution to the electron entropy is introduced properly for all the system. Consistently. There is also a problem that you need to talk water with the electrode. That was a technical problem that also has been overcome. Okay.
Please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was very interesting. I really like that you could see the hydrophilicity change that will explain also by water. It's like not ordered just on this potential charts. But I was wondering about this other thing that you also mentioned, that the coverage changes with the potential.
The coverage, yes.
I don't know if you try to correlate that with the activity or the catalyst, because there were some papers that they claim the change in the Tafel slope is not actually a change in the mechanism, but a change in the coverage of the electrodes. So
yes, I mean, the next step, it's actually, I mean, just, in the initial ideal objective of this work would have been to simulate the the hydrogen evolution reaction, okay? But then we understood there was so much to understand about the structure of the double layer. So we can only do some, speculations on that, but we haven't observed directly the hydrogen evolution reaction, okay, and the mechanism. We haven't simulated. So what I presented in that case is just the energy landscape and the coverage landscape, the equilibrium coverage associated to different potentials. Okay, so that is, but of course you are right that, understanding that is the necessary information that you need to understand what is the mechanism. And one of the questions that we have tried to answer is, are both species involved or not? Because that can affect the Tafel slope. Even if, to be honest, fully honest, I don't trust excessively what I read, not because I don't trust experiment. I trust experiment. Experiment is the truth. But sometimes these experiments are done not in a controlled position. I mean, I know that in your group you have this passion for doing things in a very controlled way, no? And which is precisely resonating with my approach. I mean, when you have, let's say that you study the effect, study the mechanism on a nanoparticulate, where you have surfaces which are oriented all in different way, low coordination sites, and perhaps even nanoparticles of different size in the system. What you observe experimentally is an average of what is there. And interestingly, I've seen this talk of, I think it was, it was an experimental lady from Bochum. She's interested in single particle nanochemistry. And she showed that all those nice and very well-behaved plots, when you go down to one nanoparticle, they don't hold anymore. So, I mean, one needs to really take con grano salis what is observed experimentally, and what is the interpretation of the Tafel slope in that case. But yes, of course, there is an important correlation between how the surface is covered by hydrogen, what are the species, the equilibrium between the species at that specific potential, and the rate, so the incremental difference in that coverage that occur when one hydrogen is evolved, one hydrogen molecule is evolved from the surface. And so from that, and reasoning about the electron density and the coverage of the surface, you can extrapolate rates. Yeah.
Any other question? I have one. So maybe this is a bit beyond what is possible. In these electrolyte cells, if I remember correctly, they have a finite lifetime, and most of this is coming from the fact that the platinum or the electrodes degrades with time, or they get impurities. And, can you model this in your with your system? Or?
Yeah. Actually, I have a project with BP about that, about what is the role of impurities in determining stabilities of electrodes. Because I mean, I like to say that I have an holistic view of processes like corrosion, electrode degradation, and electrode activity, because they all occur in that electrochemical environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can, of course, simulate what is the mechanism for hydrogen oxidation that is been also experimentally observed at high potential, if it is pure platinum, or what is the role of impurities in how the impurities affect the stability and the hydrogen evolution mechanism on platinum. So yes, you can. But of course, first you need to understand the interface structure, which I've done. But now that we have understood the interface structure, we can simulate directly the hydrogen evolution and how this is affected by presence of other species in solution, and how these species can favor, so can weaken some specific surface bond, and how the potential affect all of this. I don't know if that answers your...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? So if not, let's thank the speaker again. Thank you for your time.